Why do statues matter so much? I mean, they're just stone, right? So why are people protesting them, protecting them, or even tearing them down? Hi, my name's Bethany Belisle, and this is The Statues Will Cry Out, a mini series about the hidden powers of public monuments. Today, we're asking a simple question: why do statues matter? To answer that, we're going to discuss three things. First, what do statues actually do? Second, why are they inherently political? And third, why do people fight over them? Statues aren't just objects, they're messages. We call this symbolic communication, the idea that objects can communicate meaning without words. When you see a monument in the square, it didn't just appear. Someone chose who to put there, what they're doing, and how they're remembered. Before going further, we must define the word monument. Monument comes from the Latin verb monere, meaning to remind, to warn, or to advise. According to scholars, a monument is a structure of durable material that holds symbolic or memorial value for a particular group. They're non excludable. They are free for everyone to view, and in many cases, if you're in the vicinity, you must view them. But the scope of a monument extends far beyond a bronze figure in the square. They range from the deeply personal, such as a tombstone marking the end of a single life, to sovereign architecture, grand structures like national cathedrals that represent a nation's pure identity. Monuments are the building blocks of memoryscapes, materializations of memory in concrete spaces that include not only statues, but historical plaques, preserved landscapes, and even the built environment that hosts them. Whether it's a flag, or artifact, or city park, what all monuments share is the same intent: to provide the naturalizing locus for memory, making a state's triumphs and ideals appear as naturally true to the land itself. These physical markers are the support for a much larger invisible force: collective memory. Collective memory is the overall force that enables a group or community to form a shared awareness of selfhood and identity. Unlike individual memory, which is the matter of neuromental system, collective memory is a function of social life. It depends on socialization and communication within groups to remind them who they are and where they come from. To understand how monuments fit into the shared memory, it's helpful to distinguish between two different ways of remembering, identified by Jan Assmann, a German Egyptologist, cultural historian, and religion scholar. First is commutative memory. It's the informal, everyday memory we share through interaction. It's non institutional and typically has a limited time of death, only about 80 to 100 years, or about three interacting generations. The second way is cultural memory. When a community wants to preserve a memory beyond the lifespans of those who've lived it, they objectify it into symbolic forms such as monuments, museums, and archives. Cultural memory is highly formatized, stable, and situation transcendent, meaning it can be transmitted across thousands of years to ensure that the past remains ours. Ultimately, collective memory is a process in which groups map their own myths and values into specific times and places. If collective memory is the invisible script of a community's identity, public space serves as its grand theater and primary messaging space. These shared environments are not neutral. In a democracy, public space is an empty space that no single authority can permanently own, making it an attractive location for different groups seeking to have their specific voices heard. With this messaging arena, a monument serves as a speech act, functioning as a medium for broadcasting a particular interpretation of history and actively participating in political dialogue. They possess a illusionary level, which is the literal person or event they represent, and then an illusionary level, which is the action they perform, such as honoring. Because these structures are often funded or sanctioned by the state to be put on public land, they read as state speech, carrying a message about who belongs in a community and who holds authority. To understand how these individual statue messages fit into the broader process of history making, we're going to use a diagram created by public historian Thomas Calvin, known as the public history. In this conceptual model, the roots represent the creation and management of historical sources and archives. The trunk represents the analysis and interpretation of those sources. The branches are the media used to communicate these interpretations, which is where the statue as message resides. And leaves represent the final uses of history, such as identity building, education, and political mobilization. This diagram illustrates that a statue is not an isolated object, but a functional part of a living system that connects the deep roots of the past to the active, social leaves of our present day identity. Statues tell us who matters. They tell us what stories a society values, and maybe more importantly, what stories it ignores. Statues don't just reflect history, they reflect who had the power to shape it. Statues are born out of social and power relations, reflecting the dominant narratives of groups who, at a specific time, were powerful enough to choose what and how to represent history. By putting a single version of the past into permanent public form, the creators of these monuments lay a lasting claim to their definition of history and set terms by which they intend to shape the future. This has happened many times throughout history. Erected primarily between the 1930s and 1970s, Portuguese colonial monuments, such as the one dedicated to Salvador Correa, were designed to serve as effective artifacts to justify the empire. These monuments were explicitly intended to create among settlers a sense that the Portuguese presence in Africa was inevitable and natural. They portrayed a feel good national history that focused exclusively on heroic aspects of the conquest while remaining completely silent about the costs and of the victims. By physically building positive emotions for the settlers and a sense of innocence, these statues help the ruling regime facilitate a pattern of moral ignorance regarding the horrors of colonial violence. Another example would be the Edward Colston statue. Even though Colston lived in the 17th century, his statue was not erected until 1865, nearly 2 centuries after his death. The monument glorified a prolific slave trader as a noble, virtuous, and wise philanthropist. For over a century, the statue successfully encouraged the public blind spot regarding the source of his wealth, which came from his role as the deputy governor of a company that transported over 80,000 enslaved Africans. Most statues aren't built in the moment. They're built later, when people decide what the past should mean. As a result, a statue often tells us more about the era in which it was erected than the historical figures it normally depicts. The rise of Confederate monuments provides the clearest proof of this displacement. While the American Civil War ended in 1865, the vast majority of these memorials were not built in the immediate aftermath. Instead, archival data shows that construction peaked during two specific periods. in the 1910s at the height of Jim Crow era, and in the 1950s and 60s during the Civil Rights Movement. Between 1890 and 1920, ruling Southern elites used statues to mark their redemption of local governments and broadcast a lost cause narrative that sanitized the history of slavery. These were not just memorials for the dead, they were active tools for white supremacy designed to remind the public who held power and to ensure the continuality of values for the generation instituting segregation. The second spike of construction served as a direct reaction to the efforts to gain racial equality. Once again, using symbols of the past to reinforce white supremacist worldview in mainstream society. When you see a statue, you're not just seeing the past, you're seeing a decision about the past. But here's where things get complicated because a meaning of a statue isn't permanent. It changes. What one group sees as heritage, another sees as oppression. What one group identifies as a tribute to ancestral heroes, another group experiences as a form of derogatory pedestal. For example, why some see a statue of Christopher Columbus as a celebration of discovery, others see it as a symbol that reinforces a narrative of indigenous submission and exclusion. To manage these conflicts, different groups employ strategic framing to shape the public debate. Protesters often start by proclaiming the negative values, such as white supremacy or colonialism, that a statue inherits from the historical figure it depicts. Arguments are frequently framed around popular desire, claiming a statue should be removed or kept based on whether its legacy is wanted in the current society. Those defending controversial statues often attempt to shift the focus away from the figure's moral character and into non ethotic contexts, such as statues' legal protection, its aesthetic merit, or its financial costs of removal. When people protest a statue, they're not just reacting to the past, they're making an argument about the present. Toppling or defacing a monument is part of the contest over who gets to define the public and which values will govern the community's future. So, what did we learn? Statues matter because they're not neutral. They're tools of communication, they reflect power, and their meaning is constantly being contested. And that's why people don't just walk past statues, they fight over them. So, here's our next question: who gets to decide what stays and what goes? Next time, we'll look at how statues are actually created and who decides they'll go up in the first place.